Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, a podcast about role-playing games and the weird, wonderful people behind them. Hello, weirdos! Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, where we talk to creators behind the weird, wonderful games we love. And today, we're gonna talk to Ava Islam. Ava is the author of Errant RPG, which is described as this rules-light, procedure-heavy RPG. It's a fantasy game with weird fantasy influences. It has drawn a lot from the OSR blog posts, and we talked to Asla about her influences, how she relates to the weird, how she sees weird related to queerness, how she's a very resourceful creator, not only in her game design, on her life, her philosophy of life. And we talked about video games, we talked about horror movies, we talked about the way she does coffee, we talked so many things. It was really interesting. I learned so much. I see her as a very creative person that seeks what will make her games better and go there and do it. It was a great chat. I had a lot of fun. It got weird, and I hope you like it and get weird with us. So let's get weird with Ava Islam. Hello, weirdos! Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People. And today we have a very special guest. We have here with us Ava Islam, author of Errant RPG, which is defined as rules light and procedure heavy, which basically means she made a really great OSR game with a lot of tools for you to explore. A lot of parts of the game, like exploration, social encounters, and crafting, downtime part. But better than me talking about this, it's obviously Ava. But first of all, Ava, welcome, and how are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, just woke up, but excited to be here, excited to talk.
Yeah, me too. We haven't talked too much on the internet, but I'm excited to have you here and have the opportunity to know you better and understand a little bit how you came up with your work and who you are as a person and the weird things you like and stuff. But first of all, for everyone that's at home listening to us who doesn't know who you are, can you tell a little bit about who Ava Islam is and what do you do, and if you can share with us just a small detail, a weird thing about you, weird habits, or like how you like to dress, or how do you do your coffee, or any small detail for us to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, that's that's a lot to try to sum up, but I guess for most people who are listening to this, like you mentioned, they probably know me from Errant, which is RPG that I wrote. I wrote my own fantasy heartbreaker. Shocking, I might be one of the first people to have ever done that on the internet. But yeah, that kickstarted in 2021, released last year, and has been decently well received. Like you're mentioning, its kind of focus is on procedures, on the sorts of aspects of play that are more focused on how the game actually runs rather than the sort of nitty gritty specifics of the rules. In terms of coffee, it's actually funny that you mentioned that, I guess, because the reason that I woke up so late is that we are out of coffee today. My partner was meant to go to the cafe and grab us breakfast, but it was closed because it's Thanksgiving where we are here, because Canada has Thanksgiving a different day than America does. So then they ended up just going to work, and I ended up sleeping in, just waiting for them to bring the coffee over. But yeah, we have a mocha pot. I don't know if you know what that is. It's the little aluminum stovetop coffee maker, and it makes
Oh,
something
yeah,
that's like not quite
yeah.
espresso. And I usually end up drinking like a third of the like quote unquote 9 cups that it produces. So it's weird. I stopped drinking coffee for a long time in university because I was like constantly having this feeling of like impending dread, like the world was going to end. And I was like, why am I so stressed out and
Wow.
depressed all the time? And then I stopped drinking coffee, and I was like, oh, because I was drinking like inordinate amounts of caffeine to get through like all of the stuff that I was doing, like taking 6 courses a semester and working and like producing plays and stuff on top of it. But it's weird that now that I've started drinking coffee again, specifically the coffee that we make from this mocha pot does not end up making me feel stressed out or anxious at all. Usually, if I drink anything else in excess, I will, but not the coffee that I make. So that's my long-winded tangent about coffee.
Nice. Yeah. Here we call that mocha pot. We call it Italian pots. I don't know.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, they're
why,
Bialetti.
but
It is an
yeah,
Italian manufacturer.
yeah. And yeah, sometimes this coffee they're like made at home because you drink those from I don't know Starbucks or like even for those machines that with capsules from Nespresso or anything, they are really a lot of caffeine, like and they're really strong and concentrated. And sometimes you make those at home. Uh, they're more diluted and can feel more tastes. They're more flavorful. Uh, I really like those. I have a friend that has really likes coffee and has all these machines with different kinds of you can do. So I always trying those when I go see her. Uh, so Ava, what the podcast here is about the weird and how we sometimes identify it, how we like it, and how we kind of see the weird in a positive light. And but I'm always interested to see what people who come here, other creators, think identify as weird, and how would you define it, and why they pursue it or they avoid it, and they find it interesting or not in the weirdness. Could you talk
Yeah,
to us a little bit what it is weird for you and why you pursue or avoid it?
yeah, for sure. I think for me, when you say weird, like a few things definitely come up. Um, like first, obviously for me is like queerness, the like sort of association of those two words, at least in English, of like the weird and the queer, and like weird in like it's very like old English sense of like meaning fate, right? And queer of like something that is sort of out of sorts, not in its correct place. Um, and I guess like that like queerness I think automatically like codes you as being like weird in the colloquial sense always like in modern society there's a sense in which I realize now like as an adult reflecting on like my youth and like my not yet understood queerness and I'm like oh yeah I was definitely definitely a queer kid and everybody knew that and that was like definitely part of the reason why I felt like I always stood apart and like never sort of fit in but at least for me the idea of being weird is kind of I think like empowering and a bit of a reclamation for that because at least for me I didn't ever have the experience that I think a lot of folks have of feeling ostracized or like not in the correct place or unsure of myself. I've always felt very sure of myself and very sure of who I am. Like I knew I was different from other people, but I didn't ever view that as like a negative thing. I was always I've always liked myself. I've always like um been sort of very certain and very sure of like who I am and like what I like and what my interests are. And so I think about that like idea of like weirdness of being like fate and like queerness of being like not in place as this like as like essentially just like the power to do your own thing, right? To like write your own destiny, to not have to fit into the prescribed scripts or narratives that other people might have for you of like who you ought to be or how you ought to be or what and just having the confidence having the self-assurance to really just go out there and do your own thing and be your own person.
Wow, that's incredible, and to be this confident and have this love for yourself that young, it's fantastic. How how do you think did you arrive at that, or do have you always been like this? Is there is anything that helped you get this self love and this confidence, or anyone that helped you through this journey, or
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's difficult to like pinpoint where it would be, I guess, because like the other thing, right, is that like I'm an immigrant. And so that's already naturally this like displacing feeling of coming into out of a world that is familiar and where everyone is more or less like you to a place that is strange and where you are unlike everybody else. Um, And so I think actually, like for me, it, when I think about it, I've honestly become like a bit more anxious and like less self-assured as I've aged. Because like I feel like when I moved as a kid, I became a little bit like alienated and disconnected from my parents. I like kind of rebelled against like my Bangladeshi culture and stuff, and wanted to fit in more, or like just didn't want to be like restricted by it. And my parents would always say like, "This isn't how we do things. Like this isn't how we do things in our culture." And I'm like, well. I don't necessarily just want to abide by that. And I think as I've gotten older, I've been trying to think about the ways in which, like, I actually do want to identify with my culture and do want to relate to it and do want to keep that a part of me. The ways in which I don't fully relate to, Canada or Australia or just like the Western world in general to which we immigrated to. But so I feel like thinking about it from that lens, I should, by all rights, as a child, I think, have felt like more alienated and less like confident, self-assured. But I don't know. I just like always had a very um, strong sense of
No, you
self, I
shouldn't
guess.
have.
Well,
No, you
like
shouldn't have.
not
That's
not
perfect.
not not
That's
not
it's
shouldn't
great.
as in like as in what would have been good, but as in what would have been expected. Like I would have expected myself to have
Yeah.
to have reacted that way. But yeah, like I feel like I always just had a strong sense of self, and so I was always like, well, I'm I'm right. Everyone else is wrong. So I guess like in that sense, it might be attributed to like a little bit of arrogance or a little bit of like stubbornness or pigheadedness. But I did also always have like lots of
No, that's self-love, and that's fantastic, and more people need to embrace that. And I don't know.
yeah, I think there's definitely I think there's definitely aspects of it that are beneficial, and I think aspects of it that have helped me. Um, I think it's always about a balance, right? Because there have been times in my life,
Yeah,
especially as I was growing up, where that came at the detriment of other people, and
yeah.
I don't know if that does come
Moderation
from
is
a place.
always good. Yeah, moderation
Yeah,
in everything, like even that. But it's great because it lets you be yourself more freely and more confident and I don't know. I think. Do you think that helped you pursue what you wanted to do with your life? Helped you take more risks and have more impact in your life? Do you think that helped you accomplish what you accomplished? Because
yeah,
I
I
think that
definitely
would
think.
help. I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've always had a pretty strong idea of like what I've wanted to do, and then pursued it, and not really like let anyone else dissuade me, which has been, I think, both good and bad. Like, there are a lot of things that I think I've learned the hard way. I think that's like one thing about me is that I generally can't be taught anything. I have to like go out and do it myself and learn it myself, which is like both a blessing and a curse, right? Because there have been lots of times in my life where someone has like told me it's like, this maybe isn't the best idea. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I think it is. And then I've gone out and done it and I've been like, well, okay, maybe they were right. Maybe that wasn't the best idea. But at the very least, I am grateful for the way in which I've like had the space and I guess like the privilege to allow myself to explore those things and find out for myself. And just like that, always like orienting me towards like understanding it's like, no, yeah, like this is who I am, this is what I want to be, this is what I want to be doing.
But that's also the best way to learn things. I mean, it's
Yeah.
obviously it would be easier for us to just learn through people talking to us, but I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone has gone through to many experiences like that. People saying there's something and they obviously say, no, that was people are wrong, and they try it and they find out that they were right, like even years afterwards. But uh I think it's part of the journey because some things we have to learn ourselves because I don't know. It's hard to see the world through other lenses, and as you get older, you begin to realize your model of the world isn't the model, and you listen more. I think, like, would you say you listen more now to other people say to you than in the beginning, in the younger years, of course, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think that the experiences them like that, I think that's like an uh important part to point out, geez, is it's not just the experience of like doing something and learning about the thing itself, but also the act of like not listening to someone and like them being right and me being wrong and me learning from that. That in itself, yeah, it's like an experience that has taught me to, like, I guess, like, in a way, like, yeah, understand others, like, listen more closely, listen more deeply, and I think, like, yeah, just understand even more, like, so, like, my place in the world, like, we all, I think, like, think that we're very unique and special when we're growing up,
Yeah.
and I think, like, realizing more and more that's not necessarily the case, and not in a bad way, but just that, like, we're all kind of
Yeah.
connected. We're all like
Yes.
in the same life, experiencing roughly the same things, and that other people have experienced largely the same things we have and have things to contribute. I think that's like been a very valuable thing for me to learn.
Yeah. I don't know. Lately, I've it's something that this show is kind of about. Like we are all weird and unique, and completely different, but that's how make us all the same in some way, you know. And I think that's what it's all about. And we can recognize even other people have completely different experiences. Their experiences are valid also because they are human experiences. They are seeing the world with completely different angles sometimes, and we are just starting to see this as we get older. I think as we get more contact with more different people, right? Because I think that's obvious because why some like big cities people are much more inclusive than like in small isolated places that people just have contact with basically the same 1,000 people for 30 years of their lives, you know. So I think
Yeah, yeah, I think
that's really makes a difference.
yeah, I think the main thing, like you pointed out, is recognizing that even for the things that are different or where the experiences may seem to be different on the surface, the sort of common thread of humanity that runs through it, the way that we all,
Yeah,
experience
it
life,
repeats itself.
experience our
Yeah.
emotions. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I like to. I have anxiety, so I read a little bit about philosophy and stoicism, and you see those diaries of people living like thousands of years ago, and they experience the same kind of anxiety and things about what the people are thinking, what they have to do, what they don't have to do, what if they did something wrong, and we're all going through similar things, and kind of helps us see, oh, we're all going through this, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that used to
So
be
Ava,
something.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, so go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that, like, I think that is, yeah, kind of like, I think seeing the ways in which we are all basically experiencing the same things connected is like pretty reassuring. I used to not like, again, used to be more convinced of like my own specialness and my own uniqueness, and the thought of being just like everyone else, actually, of ironically, of like being normal and not being weird used to be something that I didn't like. I thought that was off-putting to me, but like I think, yeah, just the reassurance, the way in which it's like, yeah, we're all basically just the same kind of monkey is a comforting thought these days.
I think it takes the pressure off in some way, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's really not that big a deal.
Yeah. So Ava, you talk about creativity and the way you approach your work, and I always like to ask people that come here if they have any kind of weird ritual or weird practice they do when they're handling their art, their crafts. Like, do you wear any kind of funny hats, or do you have like a invocation of the muse, or do you listen to some kind of music, or like you have to have some kind of toy nearby or anything like this?
I feel like I might be a bit odd in this regard, in that I don't really feel like I do. Or if I do, it's like never been something permanent. I guess the main thing that I would point to is that all of my creativity, all of my creative energy tends to happen when I need to be doing something else. Like when I have important projects at work or deadlines at school, lots of essays and projects coming up, when I have lots of like family obligations or other things that I really need to be doing and that are really urgent and that I really can't put off or procrastinate, that's when I suddenly have like all of my best ideas where I'm like, oh, here's like a whole bunch of like game mechanics or stories that I'm thinking of, or just like basically even anything and everything. We were working on getting the pre-launch page for our Kickstarter live the other day, like over the weekend, and that was when I had suddenly been hit with this like uh burst of creative energy to be like, I want to like redo my blog. And I was like looking at all of these different blogging platforms and considering what it might be and like looking at different CSS style sheets. And I'm like, I don't actually have time to be doing this, but I don't really want to be doing anything other than this right now. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess that's like probably my weird ritual, if anything, is that I have to like put myself into situations where I'm like super stressed out and like want to cry and feel like I'm gonna collapse, but then be like, oh, okay, now I have creative energy. I can maybe use that later. But I never managed to actually hit the peak. The peak is always when I have to do other things. But I
Oh
somehow
wow.
managed to, I guess, squeeze it in.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. How do you handle that? If you have those ideas, do you carry a notebook? Do you write those down? How long can you keep those in memory before you have to go do that? How or do you stop everything and just go do what you have to do? I mean, what you
It
have to do, what you
depends.
want to do, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is just like, well, there's no way around it, and the energy is too much, and it's like, well, maybe I'll just like stay up after everyone's gone to sleep and manage to get out as much of this as I can. But yeah, at least the most that I can do is I do try to take notes. I do try to take stock of the ideas and at least put them in a form where even if like afterwards the creative energy has dissipated, I know that like if it comes back at some point, then I have something to
Yeah.
return to. It's not like all lost, and I can kind of try to pick up where I left off.
How do you take notes? Like, do you write those in a notebook? Do you have like an app, or do you record voice message for yourself on WhatsApp or anything?
It's haphazard, yeah. Like I'll send messages to myself. I'll talk to people on Discord about what I'm thinking about. I'll like bookmark links. I will, yeah, just I will take notes everywhere and anywhere in a Google Docs on a note file on my computer or my phone. Like I don't really have a thought out system
It,
or something that's very
okay.
efficient, but just whatever's at hand, really.
Okay, cool, cool. So, Ava, uh, talk about creativity and how you approach your work and your habits. Uh, where do you think your ideas come from? Do you have any kind of main source of inspiration, like pop culture, movies, books, comics, or any kind of medium or aspect of the world that catch your attention, inspires you to work on your art and your games and
Yeah, I think the main thing that I've come to realize about myself is that I'm not actually a very original person. Most of my ideas, most of my inspiration comes from things that already exist, I guess. Which I mean, probably is true for everyone to some extent, but I found that like usually my creative process is about finding something that I like already and thinking about tailoring it or customizing it to fit my needs. I find that I'm very good at refining ideas, refining things that are already out there in the world, not so much coming up with my own unique original stuff. Some people are really great at that. Some people are really great at coming up with these like just evocative like settings or worlds or things that like I basically like never would have been able to think of in a million years. And I've never found that that's my strength, but I think I'm really good at the details, at the process, at like taking something I've experienced and just refining it down.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, uh, I'm a strong believer that like there is nothing new under the sun. We're all like just making collages of experiences and things we saw, and like originality is usually undetected plagiarism. I really like the book. I don't know if you heard about See Like an Artist. Uh,
Mhm.
but I mean, and it takes off this pressure of being like original because everybody's like taking everything from each other, and since we're humans and we can't make perfect copies, like we are imperfect, we always infuse it for a little bit of ourselves. So uh even if we try to copy something, we will end up with something different a little bit. So and I kind of see like yourself. In the beginning, I didn't believe in make adventures of settings. Like I always make these games of tables and everything, and somehow I got convinced to make an adventure. and I got an award and started believing I could write some of the stuff. But I think it's just things that I think creative people can work these things out, and I see your points, like in how to explore this. But and talking about this kind of media again, there's any kind of thing that you saw or read recently that got your attention that would like to share, or anything weird that you experienced lately, or consuming in some
That
way that's
that's an
made you think
interesting
about something
question.
new? I don't know.
Yeah, I having a hard time thinking about it now that you've like put me on the spot and asked it because I feel like there is always stuff that we're going through. I guess probably one of the most impactful things I've seen, which isn't like super recent, but in the last few months, was Ari Aster's new film, Beau is Afraid, starring Joaquin Phoenix. I don't know if you've seen it. It's Ari Aster's the guy that directed Hereditary and Midsummer. I'm a big horror
Oh,
fan, and Hereditary is like one of my favorite films of all time. I think one of the just like the best modern horror films. And Beau is Afraid is just this like very weird, very like polarizing film. Like it's very like whereas the last two films are very critically acclaimed, this one is very mixed. It's kind of self-indulgent. It's like 3 hours long. It's this very like personal, strange, bizarre, surreal story just about this dude who is like basically like the most anxious dude on the planet, and he basically has to get back to his mom's house. And that is the entire story, but just everything that happens in it is so bizarre and so surreal. And I keep thinking about the ways in which Joaquin Phoenix is an amazing actor, but it's so funny because he's basically just making like one expression and giving like one emotion throughout the entire film, which is just like panic, terror, just complete confusion and anxiety and inability to comprehend what's going on. But it feels like so, at least for me, so weirdly relatable and so like finely textured in terms of conveying like a very like personal, idiosyncratic, emotional experience of moving through the world just by everything that happens to him. Everything that happens to him is so like is so oddly specific that it conveys the exact kind of emotion that I think Ari Aster is trying to convey, and the particular way that he feels about things and the way that he experiences it. And there was just so much of that that I found so relatable. So that's definitely been, I think, one of the things that I was thinking about. One of the things that I saw or experienced this year that I was that I've been turning over in my head that has, I think, really impacted me. I think definitely the way in which it's like it plays with form, the way in which it reveals interior experience through exterior external experiences, I think is a really intriguing and captivating method of storytelling that I think like really departs from like kind of like Western norms and conventions that I don't always find the most useful or the most adequate for um just in terms of like using to tell my stories or to convey how I experience the world. And so that was, I think, yeah, just like a film that I saw recently that I found very, very exciting, very moving, very unique and fresh and energizing.
wow, that's sounds very very different. I'm not really familiarized with how this work. I've seen Midsummer because everybody talked about it, and yeah, uh, I'll definitely check that out and try to work up on the show notes. I always say that and I always miss it, but if you can send me like the name of this specifically movie.
Mhm.
I noted Midsummer and Hereditary, but I lost this one. But sounds interesting, and I do a lot of anxiety, so I don't know. Maybe I'll see, maybe not, because maybe making me more anxious. I don't know. uh,
I
so,
definitely think it's cathartic in that sense for if
oh
you're an
yeah,
anxious person because it becomes so ridiculous and so
okay,
extreme that it kind of like just like it like leaves the realm of realism and I think becomes very cathartic in that way.
okay, yeah. So I'll definitely check that out. If you can send me the name, I can look for it. I don't know if it's available. It's available in streaming or like in
Yeah, I think I
movies
think
or.
it's I think it's out of theaters now. It's called Beau is Afraid. I'll send you the title.
Okay, Bo is Afraid.
It definitely feels
It's
like
okay.
Beau.
Yeah, yeah. I saw that
Yeah,
Beau.
AU.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna ask if it's like Bo, if Bo or
No,
any
Beau.
other.
Yeah, it's definitely like a very like you can tell that it's like he made these two films which were like incredible hits, and this one was just kind of like, okay, this is like your victory lap. You can just do whatever you want, no notes, no
Yeah,
restraint. Just like just this one's for you. This one's very he got to do what he wanted with it.
yeah, and I love that. That's one of the things I love about what we do, like the indie RPG stuff. Like we're all kind of doing what we want, right? And and that's a great segue to what I would like to start asking you a little bit about RPGs and things like that. What's one of our passions, I think. So, Eva, do you consider role-playing games weird? And if you do, what would be your favorite weird thing about them?
Um, yeah, I think role-playing games are pretty weird. I think I think they I think my favorite thing about them, and I think the thing that's weirdest about them is just like um the way they are, the way in which they kind of on some level don't exist. Like, because it's like, what is a role-playing game other than, for the most part, like obviously there are some experiments with the form and using different mediums, but it's ultimately just like a set of rules about how to talk. They're like incredibly sometimes complicated and arcane rules and rituals for just like talking to other human beings. And the way in which that somehow through that, at the best of times, it can transmute speech into just something else. Like the way in which it is kind of, and not to be like super like new agey or mystical or woo about it, but it's like it's kind of like a spell, right? Like it is kind of just like here are instructions of like things to say and actions to perform and little things to do. And by doing that, you are just going to have this completely different kind of experience. Like new things will be created, will come into the world as a result of following these instructions. And I think it's fundamentally weird. I think it's like completely different from almost any other medium in which there are different elements, I guess, like different materials, different mediums that we interact with. It's not like video games, it's not like music, it's not like film. It's probably closest to theater, but even then it is so basic at like it's at the level of just it's just talking.
Yeah, I love this concept of RPGs. I always say like RPGs are an incomplete game. We sell these people this book. There's some rules and how to do things, but they can't open the book and start reading and they start playing. They have to complete the games themselves as they play it, right? And as you said, like being kind of spells make really a great image. Like D&D, it's almost synonymous with RPGs. And back in the days, like this Vancian magic that reads the spell partially comes to your mind, but it only completed as you cast it. So it's kind of this great parallel as role playing games. Like you read the books, you have this in your mind, but you only complete the game or the spell as we play them. And it's very insightful way to see things. If I'm really uh, grateful for you for this image that came to my mind now for you because of
Yeah, and
this.
it's really weird, right? Because again, like to go back to it, since it's fundamentally talking, it is on one level very old, like very primal, like but it's like it's potentially like the oldest kind of game, right? Is just playing make believe, but also at the same time as a medium, it's like so new, right? It's like barely older than video games or might be even younger depending on how you want to account for it. And I think has actually even undergone like less evolution and less theorizing in that span than video games have. I feel like video games have evolved so
That's
much since
true.
like the 60s and the 70s, whereas RPGs I feel like are still very nascent, very like in their infancy. I feel like there's so
Yeah.
many aspects of it to explore. Um, that
Yeah,
have
for
not
sure.
yet been explored, and the way in which it even actually intersects with all of those things with Eva, because RPGs are also like a literary form, right? They are books and printed materials, but they're not just books and printed
Absolutely.
materials. They're not just what is at the culture of the play. They're not just the digital tools or the other supplements you might use them, and you might like supplement them with video or audio. It is really this like weird encompassing medium that is like both everything and
Yeah.
nothing. That is both like new and old.
It lives in, like, in this liminal space between all these other media, and plays a little bit of them and can learn a little bit of them all, but has all these unique things that no one else, none of them have, and that's something that's, I think it's one of the most interesting things about role playing games, right? I think it's something that captivates everyone because there's nothing like this out there, right? And even choose your own adventures, you always have this path you have to follow, and in RPGs it's great because it's completely open ended, and everybody, because it makes everybody an author, everybody a builder, and especially people that have created like was published books. It's a great feel to make something, right? So when people are playing this, they're making something. Oh, maybe that's one of the things that attract them to it, I think.
Yeah. I guess a thought that I just had while we were talking is that I guess like the thing about role playing games and the thing that makes them so weird and open ended is that like they're fundamentally like not that different from life. Like life is a set of like performances that we go through that are structured by like rules and rituals. And I guess it's because like I think I was wrong to say that role playing games are just talking. Like with when you play soccer, when you play football, the thing that you are playing with is a football. When you play basketball, the thing you are playing with is a basketball. When you're playing role playing games, the object of play is essentially like human experience. It's like human phenomenology. The like thing that you are playing with and toying with is like your own perspective, your own experience. The things that you are experiencing, that is actually like the the material that is manipulated through a role playing game is your own experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're experiencing, and you're mixing this with the experience of others that are playing with you, and creating something that's, and nobody else would be able to experience alone, right? Especially if we're playing group. Now we're playing uh solo games too, but even that, I don't think it's completely alone because we're following guidance from the author that created all these tools and oracles that help you guide your experience that you're infusing your own life, but with guidance of this collaborator in some way. Ava, uh, what would be like the weirdest thing or your favorite thing in your work on Errant? Uh, could share with the listener, like what is the weirdest thing about your work, and how did you get to that?
What is the weirdest thing about my work?
Or like the weirdest procedure, and how did you get to, like, the weirdest thing that can happen in some procedure, something interesting. It can be small, it can be big. It doesn't have to be
I
like,
think,
oh, it's not the main thing.
yeah, I,
It
I
can be
feel like
even an Easter egg hidden there.
the funniest
Sorry.
thing, and I guess like the weirdest thing, and the thing that I think I'm constantly thinking about and tinkering with is like movement. Like in errant, when you in combat, the default system is actually that movement is not static, that you have to like roll to move. And I feel like this has been like the weird like bane of my existence of like I have gone through like so many iterations of this of like trying to get the math right and trying to get it to work properly and interact in a way in which I'm like happy with it. Because it's I think like it's one of those things that I think at least in one sphere of role playing games is like it feels like pretty given that it's like it's like in D&D it's always been like you move 30 feet or you move however many feet. Like movement is always this thing that is static. And I guess I got to this because when I was thinking through and kind of trying to like think through the old school play, like old school play and like old school procedures from the ground up, movement seemed to be such an important part of it in terms of how it interacts with weight and moving through the dungeon. And it feels like it just came about naturally, but it's always been this really kind of sticky, fiddly kind of mechanic that I don't think I've managed to make it work or make it quite right yet. But I'm still so fascinated by it. I feel like I'm always coming back to it and just trying to see how that works, because I feel like there's so much drama in that in gameplay that I found of like wanting to do something and not being able to do it. And I feel like that usually comes from like the attack roll, right? To see whether you hit or miss. But an errant, attacks are automatic. You always deal damage, at least one damage. So moving that uncertainty, moving that locus to somewhere else, I think has been something that really fascinates me. And I guess like in terms of my own life, the way in which it relates, I think there's like this sense of like not having your abilities always quite match up with your will, right? Like this, the tension that comes from like, I need to get to the door. It's like 40 feet away. Like if I don't get to it, this fucking ogre is going to eat me, right? And that tension and that uncertainty that comes from like, that's not a given. I'm gonna have to roll to see if that happens. And that like fundamentally is something that's in most RPGs, but moving it to that. And I think that I really relate to that in a weird sort of way, because having ADHD, struggling with like executive function, I feel like there's like lots of times during the day where I'm like literally just unable to move, where I'm like, I know I've got to get up and do something. I've got to go do the dishes. I've got to go like go get groceries or whatever the case may be. And knowing that I should be able to do it, knowing that it should really not be so hard to do, but like just not rolling well enough, I guess, on the dice. And so exploring that tension in play between the delta between one's will and one's abilities is something that I think is like a very interesting. I think it reveals. I think it reveals interesting things when you move that tension and that uncertainty to different places. Like when we make this thing in a game uncertain, what does that say? What kind of experiences does that bring up? Versus if if movement is random versus if attacking is random versus what else? Like when we change that in a game, what does that change in play?
Hello weirdos, this is Diogo Nogueira and I'm back with a word from our sponsors. Me! I just released a new game called Cosmosaurus, in which you play a dinosaur space ranger who protects the galaxy from evil threats such as slime bankers, undead pirates, and Cosmosaurus from a void dimension. It's a game with a runes-light system inspired by Forged in the Dark and Lasers and Feelings. It comes with a bunch of tables for you to generate content for it. If you know my games, they're really easy to play and they have tools to help you improvise and play with low prep. It's an ideal game for one-shots, short campaigns, and introducing new people to the hobby, and it's a really perfect family game. I play with my kids all the time. It's a game inspired by Saturday morning cartoons. It's really well illustrated by Lucas Kowalski from Poland, and with a great layout by Guilherme Gontijo. It's a really fun game. You should check it out on Drive-Thru RPG, itch.io, or exclusively in print on exaltedfuneral.com. I have many other games there, check them out. All the links are in the show notes, so click there. And let's get back to Weird with our chat. Yeah, the following question should be, so as you did that with Errant and you focused on randomness, on movements, what was your intention? What was your goal to do that? To focus on these dramatic situations of trying to escape a monster or trying to run faster than the bridge is falling down, or what was your goal with that?
Yeah, I think basically it like did just come out of wanting to make exploration meaningful throughout all levels of play, right? In terms of everything kind of stems around or grows out of like the encumbrance system, like inventory. How much can you carry? And how much does that slow you down? What like decisions do you have to make about that? So I found that like idea of like reading in like BX like Moldvay and stuff, these like descriptions of realizing that like when you are carrying more treasure, you move more slowly, and that means that like you use up more torches to get through the same amount of space. And these like descriptions of chases where you have to come to the decision of like, do you want to drop some of the treasure or try and face this monster or just take the risk? And really wanting to um crystallize that play experience and bring it through to all levels of play. So it just like naturally felt like movement was this thing that was like so important, and wanting to keep its
Yeah,
importance and keep that focus on it throughout all levels of play, kind of harmonizing that.
yeah, that's great. People always says that D&D, it's like, oh, it's a dungeon crawling game, and the OSRs are always proud to say it's a game about exploration and discovery, and maybe doing what you did, like making damage automatic, like into the order or something that makes the decisions very like uh, combat is very dangerous, and you have to avoid it, and then make the exploration more granular, and you have to make these strategic choices, and it's kind of show the rules that the exploration can be the focus of play, and turn it in more of a game for players to interact with, and maybe elaborate more strategies, right? And to how to do with all these different environments that you present in the game, like all the different uh, timetables as you exploring dungeons or a wilderness, or like an overland map, right?
Yeah, I feel I really love playing tactics games like XCOM or Final Fantasy Tactics or Fire Emblem. And I feel like even though those games usually don't have random movement, the speed of your characters is often, and how much they can move is often so pivotal in those games.
Oh
Like in
yeah.
XCOM, I've had so many moments where it's like if I could move one extra square, I would be able to actually make a shot at something and prevent one of like my squad mates from dying. But because I can't, like if I move that extra square, I'm gonna like dash and actually lose my shoot action, and having to make those strategic choices about positioning and placement, and making those like really like interesting and tough choices. And I was it's like funny because I guess like in playing D&D, I don't think I've ever really had a moment really where that has actually been relevant. It's usually been like, oh, these people are this far away. Well, they're usually close enough for me to move up and hit them or do whatever I need to do. Or, I can like pull out my bow. Like I've never had the experience in D&D, very rarely, of something just like being like out of range, of like movement really seeming to matter. But I do remember like one of the first campaigns I ever ran in 5e, there was this like pivotal fight scene where they were trying to rescue this innkeeper that they were friends with who had been kidnapped, and they were like fighting off these goons, and they were trying to like find which room he was in. And then when they did get him, he had this like essentially this like bomb like rigged up to him, and they had to like get him over to this like different part of the map to like try to rescue it, to try to like defuse it before it went off. And all the while, again, like there are all of these like enemies that are attacking them. And I just remember that being such a fun and tense encounter where like movement and the amount of actions that you had really really mattered, and it really wasn't a given that they were actually going to be able to get off and like make it in time. And I think those kinds of experiences, chases, um those scenes are just like always, I think, like really innately exciting, but that it's very rare that the mechanics end up easily delivering that experience, that they often just feel taken for granted.
Yeah, that's true. And because most of RPGs, like the OSR at least, don't expect this granularity and this focus on the procedure, and kind of incomplete games, right? And I've seen in your game design for Errant, you explored an environment much greater than the OSR. I've seen influence from different kinds of games there, and how do you proceed, how you manage to mix them up with the chassis of the OSR game and make it work within these chassis. It's very interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit on the influences you had on the game design for Errant, and what other games that helped you arrive at your vision, and how do you manage to reinterpret what you learned from them in your own game design?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it actually, because I mean, tying back to even the beginning of our conversation of I think a big process of the OSR maturing, as I think that like a lot of how the OSR was in sort of the 2010s, is very much that kind of teenage view of thinking you're very special and very unique. And like we were talking about, as you get older, you kind of realize like, oh no, kind of everyone's been there and done that, and we're all like more or less experiencing the same things. I think, um, like lots of people have pointed out that like the position and impact rules in Errant are from Blades in the Dark, but like the reason that I came to that is specifically actually there was a set of articles by Chris McDowell of Bastionland and Sam Dobler, I believe, of Dreaming Dragon Slayer, that were talking about position and impact through, I guess, kind of the lens of Into the Odd. And it was one in which Chris McDowell was talking about how he doesn't use advantage and disadvantage, and that instead of doing that,
Yeah.
what you can actually do is alter the stakes of the roll, right? That like advantage actually just might mean, well, you're still rolling 1d20, but instead of just being able to convince someone to give you, some money, they might also give you some extra resources or some hirelings on this quest to help you out if you succeed. Um, and then that and then Sam Dobler of Dream and Dragon Slayer basically pointed out that this was kind of almost the same as position and impact from Blades in the Dark, which came out of this forum post about a game that basically just uses like a coin flip almost essentially as a resolution mechanic. I don't remember if it was John Harper or someone else, but that like you can still alter the stakes of that by altering the fiction. And
Yeah.
that is still like, I mean, a lot of people would look at that and be like, that's like a very OSR idea. But when people see the rules as they're written, they're like, oh, this is from Blades in the Dark. This is like a quote unquote story game thing, right? But again, like this is like a common hobby. This kind of all descends from the same roots. And so there are all of these things in different types of games that we might not consider OSR, or that we might be like, oh, this is actually not like the kind of experience that we want because the mechanics are disassociated or it's too abstract or too gamey or whatever. But they're always kind of fundamentally delivering on the same experience. Like the other thing that I would point to is like Ben Lawrence of Miserian's Garden through Old Town's Door. The downtime system in Errant is very much based on his blog post there, and he notes that like 2d6 roll from Powered by the Apocalypse from Apocalypse World and stuff is essentially just like a descendant, is a adaptation of the reaction roll from D&D, and the way in which that structure of like failure, success with a complication, or full success kind of comes full circle in that being reintegrated into the OSR. So I guess one of the things is that I just wasn't dogmatic. I just wasn't and I guess coming at it from not the perspective of, I did play the older editions when I was a kid, but I played it as a kid. I didn't, live through the 70s and the 80s. So I didn't have that like allegiance, I think, or the nostalgia specifically to these sets of rules or this style of play. I had a goal in mind of like what kind of play experience I wanted to produce. And I was willing to be, I suppose, promiscuous in what sources I looked for or what tools I would employ in order to achieve those aims. And I think in doing so, it just revealed that like, yeah, that like lots of these things are more linked, less different than you might think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in many different kinds of art, the same ideas kind of happen to emerge in different areas, and it's something that it's like in the surface,
Yeah,
and it can be like the same sources could have been seen by John Harper and Chris McDonald and you and other people, and these things just emerge. And sometimes, oh, they took it from there and that, and like even like advanced in these adventures, and like, oh, it is from Positive Die from White Hack, or is this from some other game? Barbarian of Songamura did it, and everybody started discussing, oh, they took this from that, but it's really doesn't matter. But I mean, we are all kind of seeing each other. We are all like kind of in the same pool, right? So
yeah.
we're
I mean,
always,
it's the same way, like it happens in nature too, right? With like convergent
yeah,
evolution, where, sharks
yeah,
and dolphins are not related at all, but they come upon the same basic body design because they have the
yeah,
same basic
absolutely.
needs, or the way in which everything becomes a crab eventually. Nature keeps inventing crabs.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. But I was curious to see how did you arrive in this mix of traditional OSR mechanics and very uh, contemporary ways of design and structure, and because I think I don't know if you agree with me with this, but I think role-playing games are learning a lot from board games and how to present rules
Yeah.
and how to present procedures. I don't know if you do you play board games? Does that influence any way your design, or have you learned anything from other games on how to present rules or how to present your games in your games?
Yeah, for sure. Like I actually did kind of so the my return to RPGs did come out of board games actually. Like in high school, me and my friends got into board games first. Like we had this was kind of back when Geek and Sundry was doing the show with like Will Wheaton, like Tabletop, whatever, and Shut Up and Sit Down had kind of started to get big. And so I think it was actually like I mentioned, I had played D&D when I was a kid, but I kind of fell off of it for a while. Didn't have a group to play with, moved countries and all that. So that wasn't actually like where I came from. It kind of came out of like we were playing all of these tabletop games, these board games. Fifth edition came out, everybody was kind of interested in it, and so I started DMing for my board game group. And so I think that idea, those like experiences of like thinking about board games first, of thinking about that kind of game design, and even like video games too, because I used to design video games sort of back in high school with my friends. And so I do definitely think that I approached it from that kind of experience too, of like having experienced board games and video games mostly as a more formative thing, and as a thing that I had more experience with than role playing games, and sort of bringing that structure and that style of game design to bear. Because I think like yeah, role playing games I think at first were pretty confusing for me. I think that I was always like, well, I had that idea. I think that like a lot of people have is when you're told about it is like it's about telling a story, and I think that like that is like the idealized thing. But at least when you play D&D, you're suddenly like, well, there's actually like all of these like weird rules and all of these games that like there's a game here, and trying to mesh those two and trying to make it make sense, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I think was a bit confusing for me. And I think that confusion and trying to understand RPGs through the lens of other games, like video games and board games, that I actually did understand, and thinking, okay, well, how is this similar? How is this different? What can I take from that? And um, what differentiates them? I think, yeah, having that perspective and having that lens, I think, has definitely informed my game design and why I make games the way I do.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. And uh, how would you say video games influence it? I mean, I have talked about the procedure, and I've been seeing how board games influence role playing game design. But could you tell a little bit about how video game design influenced you, and if you can, any kind of specific game or thing that you drew inspiration from?
I guess one of the things um, so when I was designing games, I didn't code, but I did kind of like come up with ideas for like mechanics, like levels, and sort of like the idea of like game feels and aesthetics. And I think that's like what's always drawn me to video games. And I think like one of the things that I'm realizing is that like even though I've been a gamer my whole life, I'm not very good at like playing games. But what I would often do is I would get like obsessed with video games. Like I would like learn about a video game, and I would like read all of the guides and like read all of this material and get like into the art and like write fan fiction, and like kind of video games became almost an imaginative springboard for me to like do my own fantasy. I would like imagine myself in the world of the video game or as characters in it. So even though there were like lots of games that like I barely played, I've like never gotten past like the first few levels as a kid. I spent so much time immersing myself in those worlds because those games had such, I guess, video games are so great at like conveying a very specific mood, a very specific feeling, a very specific idea. And I think that that is probably why like the commonality or the bridge that I see between like my video game experience and my RPG experience is I find them they're both ideally about springboards for imagination. And I think keeping that in mind and keeping the idea of like focus, and like sort of very specific intent that I think video games allow you to do. Whereas I think with RPGs, it can be very easy to get lost in the idea of like, this can be about anything. We can do anything. But yeah, for me, it's always been about trying to capture very specific things, very specific moods, very specific experiences.
Very cool. Yeah. Uh, Ava, what would you say would be the weirdest game you ever played, even RPGs or board games or even video games? And what would be your favorite thing about that game? Or like even I always say the most, but it can be something recent, something that caught your eyes, or you've been thinking a lot recently.
One of there is what I guess like one thing that was recent. I don't know if it's the weirdest, but it's like a funny experience that I've been thinking about is like um I have weirdly like never really known how to play poker, even though I've like played poker a bunch of times with my friends. I, for some reason, have never been able to understand hands in poker, like what like the different like orderings of a hand and like rankings of them and like what you're actually like meant to look for in a good hand. That's something that for some reason has like never ever been able to stick in my brain. But recently I was actually playing this like little indie game called Balatro, I think, which is like I don't know if you've ever played Slay the Spire or any of those games that are like these like deck building roguelikes where you know make a deck and you fight enemies and you go through it. But this is basically a game that's like that, but it uses poker hands instead of like
Hmm.
like cards that have like effects or whatever. Like in Slay the Spire, you have cards that like deal attack or uh, block damage that is coming at you from enemies. But in this, it's just like cards. You just like play poker hands and you get little bonuses and add-ons that like make like playing two pair get you like three times as many points or things like that. And it's very funny that this is like even though I've like played poker in other video games, like there are poker mini games in Red Dead Redemption and stuff, this is finally the first one that I'm like, oh, now I know what poker hands are. Like I actually like understand the logic of the game, what it looks for. And it's weird that that was like specifically. I'm trying to think about like why it might have been that this is actually finally what made it stick in my head because it's not just that there was like a list that I could reference of poker hands because lots of games have had those lists, but yeah, I just find it very strange that like um I've always avoided poker. I've always been like I like playing blackjack because it's a game I can understand. But like yeah, I don't know. I like poker now, I guess, because of this one weird little indie game.
Nice. Yeah. Well, did you like roguelike games a lot? So maybe that's something or no?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely the way in which these the hands themselves, the 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 like different poker hands are kind of like different builds, right? They're almost like
Okay.
classes. Because throughout the game you can get like little cards that are like if your hand contains a three of a kind, multiply your score by 10, or if your hand contains like a full house, like so you almost end up like building into these kind of specific styles of play of like being like for this deck this run I'm gonna aim for full
Okay.
houses and whatever. And so the way in which those almost become like strategies and synergies and character builds, that's always been something I've enjoyed doing is like min-maxing and
Nice. Yeah.
optimizing character builds or whatever. That's always been one of the ways in which I play games without playing games is like theorizing. So I think the ways in which it like made the poker hands themselves objects that I could interact with and like interface with, I
Yeah.
think is definitely why they've managed to stick in my head.
Yeah, and creates kind of a narrative because you're building to it. Because when you're playing poker, you just exchange cards once, right? You're not
Yeah,
building to it. You get your cards, you trade once, and that's it. You're not you're not continue to build it. So maybe
yeah,
this progress helps uh, in the narrative and in the fun to making and perfecting and building something, right? So
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Uh, And Ava, talking about now other weird things, I wanted to get a little bit more personal and talk about your experiences. And I wanted to ask you about weird experiences you might have had even recently or over your life that you would like to share. Anything metaphysical, like do you believe in ghosts? Have you ever, I don't know, seen a ghost or anything like this?
I I have no idea. I definitely feel like I have strange experiences or strange phenomenons where things feel unreal or like strange things feel like they're happening. Right now, we have like fucking squirrels living in our roof, and there are mice in our walls in the kitchen. And so half the time at night, like we just are hearing these like strange sounds all the time of these like little critters moving through our house. Our neighbors, we live in like a row of townhouses, and our neighbors, I guess the walls are very thin, so we can always hear everything our neighbors are doing, all of the movies that they're watching or the TV shows or what music they're listening to. And I presume that they can do the same. It's been really interesting because like half the time, like I recognize exactly what it is that they're watching or seeing, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that episode of Better Call Saul, or yeah, this is a good Radiohead album. And I keep wanting to be like, maybe I should introduce myself. They have good taste, but they've definitely heard me like freak out and hear too much. But it is very weird, I guess, because this is like maybe the first place I've lived where I've been like so keenly aware of like other life happening around me. I kind of feel like I'm in this like weird little bubble, and all of these things, all of these like different life forms and different organisms are just like I'm just catching like weird little glimpses of their life, like shadows reflected on a screen. The other night I was like up really late and I was just like playing video games. I don't know, I didn't know where my cat was. She normally follows me around. Then I heard like some skittering and some terrified screeching from the kitchen that I think was like a mouse, and I'm like, oh god, did she kill a mouse? Am I gonna have to dispose of a mouse corpse tonight? And thankfully she didn't, but she was definitely like hanging out by the walls where they come out. So yeah, this just been a very like weirdly surreal experience, I guess, of like living in this house where like the walls are constantly infested with the sounds of other living creatures, human and non-human.
Yeah, that's that's weird. That can be unsettling sometimes if you're like distracted and a lot of things in your mind and you hear this noise and you forget what it is. But do you believe, like, do you think ghosts could be real, or you have never give it much thought?
I think I've thought about it. And I think that like I mean, for me it matters, like, because I guess like always the thing that I come down to is like, were this thing to be true, would any aspect of how I live my life change? And I find for a lot of things it's like no. Um, but like, it's like if ghosts are
Yeah,
real, I thankfully probably don't live in any places that have ghosts or places where they would attack me or haunt me. But like what is real, right, is like I feel fear. I have definitely been afraid of the dark as a child, and even sometimes now where, I will be reading really, I'll be watching horror movies, I'll be reading creepy pasta, or I'll, be doing something at night, and I just it's strange. I don't have the experience often, but sometimes I do find myself just spooked out and creeped out and just like
yeah,
running through the house at night or tiptoeing around. And it's like, that's real, right? Like what
yeah,
matters, what we experience, our human subjectivity is what's real. So like in that sense, like things obviously are real in as much as we believe them to be, or they affect our behavior.
yeah. I've been watching this series on Netflix called Encounters, which
Hmm.
they retell people, like large group of people that have really similar experiences in these places about aliens and stuff. And then I'm very fascinated about this, about ghosts, aliens, and everything. I'm very skeptic. Uh, but as I'm watching this, and then I was like late at night, and I went to the kitchen to grab some water, and I don't know, it just had this strange feeling that there's something like watching you, and then I started getting anxious, and I'm like, I had to stop and say, Diogo, there is nothing here. Just stop, calm down, and there's no way there is anything here. No. Our
Yeah,
mind
I
is
get.
very like this, right? It's very
Yeah, I
impressionable.
guess
It's
that's like
really, I
the
mean,
interesting thing. That's the interesting thing to me, and I guess that's like what I care about is less about like, because it's like, like for example aliens, right? It's like, do I think aliens are real? It's like that depends on a frame of reference, like given the universe, most likely, but also like I doubt that like there's no reason to believe that they're in a form or even in a thing that like is perceptible to us or even anything like in the scope of what we could experience or that we could interact with. And so I doubt that it really matters. Like functionally, are we going to have contact with other, intelligent life forms in a way that is meaningful to us? Like I very much doubt it. But what is interesting to me, and what does pique my interest, I guess, is these narratives. Is like, why do we think these things? Why do we tell these stories across time and across cultures? Why do we have this experience of there being something more, of there being something watching us? What does that say like about us, right? Like for me, these are stories and these are experiences that are interesting for what they say about us as people rather than external reality. And I guess that goes back to what we were talking about in terms of like Beau is Afraid, where it's like the things that we think are in the world, the things that we see in the world, the things that we experience in the world, tell us more about like people and ourselves and our internal experience and reality rather than actually anything about the world. The world is like fundamentally just an illusion. It is just like a process that is being created by a weird subjective experience that our cells are doing. But we make meaning out of that. And again, just try to tie things full circle. That process of meaning making, that process of like changing our experiences by changing our narratives is literally role playing games, right? Fundamentally, at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. And I've you're studying meaning in life, and then just came this phrase that I heard recently, and made so much sense to me that like the meaning of life, it's finding a meaning for you. It's giving meaning to your life. Like there's no recipe. Everybody will find their path and what they like to explore and this. So yeah, so explore a little bit further how this impacts your life, and that's things that interest you. So the other word experience I would like to ask you about, if you had, did you have any kind of perceptual altering experience? It would be like any kind of meditation or spirituality or uh hypnosis or psychedelics, or anything that's made you see reality through a different angle, and did that ever impact your life in some way? Or
I am a big proponent of Molly, of MDMA, of ecstasy, the drug. Um, and I'm not the only one. I'm pretty sure that within a decade, low dose MDMA usage is going to be very common within like therapeutic practice. But for me, I think like the first time that I took it and we went out, I you know I struggled a lot in my early 20s, trying to like make my way through life and dealing with like poverty and depression and like dysphoria. And I think that like there had been like sort of like big turning points for me in terms of like breakthroughs in like my personal philosophy and realizing that like happiness kind of comes from within, right? That's like not something external to us, that it's always that like searching for it in other things or waiting for it to come to us is always going to
yeah,
be futile. It is something that we make. But I think that like the experience of being on ecstasy for the first time was what really cemented it, because it was it, right? It was that euphoria. It was that feeling of like being completely at ease in the world, being completely at peace, being just joyful, and being able to share that joy and being able to like be in harmony with other people. And it made me realize it's like, okay, well, sure, it's a chemical, but fundamentally, this is something that happened inside my own body. This is an experience that lives within me. This is an experience that I'm
absolutely.
capable of having. These are emotions that I can feel. I didn't ever feel those emotions before, and so it felt alien. It felt mysterious. It felt like something that was outside of me, that existed in the world somewhere, and that I had to find it. And so being able to have it unlock that, of like knowing that I could feel this way, of knowing that like this happiness and this kind of like just yeah, that this ecstasy, that this euphoria is an experience that I was capable of having, I think felt really empowering for me and really like let me take charge of my life. I definitely like wouldn't have like I was very stop start on my transition, but like that was like the first time that I felt like so comfortable in my body and so comfortable in my gender that like it let me actually have the courage to like start doing it, and moving forward with it. And so that definitely for me, I'm like always a very big proponent of like, and I believe in like harm reduction and drug safety, and there's always like things that you should do to ensure that you're safe. But like, I love
Yeah,
introducing my friends, like going out clubbing and introducing them to Molly, because it definitely like I think was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life, and it kind of changed it for much the better, of like being able to experience that, of being able to understand that like love and joy and that happiness is something internal to me, and that therefore I am empowered. I have the ability to access it. It's a choice. It's of my own making.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of institutions making really serious research of the use of MDMA or LSD or psilocybin on treatments of various things, and even for normal therapy for people with dealing with anxiety. I've started taking psilocybin magic mushrooms because of
Hmm.
anxiety and like microdosing, and I made other experience. Of course, I took higher doses and experienced other things. And I have a friend that always said to me, "You have to try MDMA and stuff." I haven't yet, but it's definitely something I'm very interested in. And people always refer to this as a very a way to access. It facilitates love in some way, and
Yeah,
then
it is
experiencing
a
this. Yeah, it sounds very fascinating. And one way I've heard people describing the use of psychedelics and how this helps, even if you only took it once in your life, it says that we're going through life like we're here on the floor, and there's all these mountains and have all these buildings and this fog, and we're always going through our lives the best as you can. And sometimes uh, this drug and I mean drug, but I say our society is it's a completely drug based society. Everybody drinks coffee every day, everybody drinks beer, and everybody takes any kind of drug for like headaches, and nobody bats an eye for that. Uh, but like this MDMA or psychedelics that help you go, like they took you to this very tall mountain, and you could see everything from the top, and you can see more clearly, and can see what's ahead of you, can see yourself down there, and then you get back down, and I say, "Oh, isn't that bad? You came back down if you got lower." But you always have that memory of what you saw, and you know what's there, and you know you can reach there. And that description kind of aligned with what you said about what you experience, and to know it's inside of you, and you can work to access that. Uh,
yeah.
does that
It like
ring a bell to you? Does that relate
yeah,
to you?
yeah, for sure. It like goes back to what we were talking about earlier, I think, about like learning, about just like broadening your experiences of like learning, seeing for yourself, like having that experience of like, oh, so someone told me something and it ended up being true, and then learning sort of to trust other people more. Or like you're talking about, like when you live in a city and you meet people from different walks of life and different experiences. And ultimately it's like you said, it's all about like experiencing different things, like broadening your realm of experience, and how that gives perspective, right? That's like what it is at the top of the mountain, is it's perspective. It lets you see
Yeah,
things in a different way. It lets you see things in a different angle, and that changes your understanding. It changes your idea of your place in the world, right? It's like going from seeing a two-dimensional image to seeing a three-dimensional image, right? It lets you understand things
yeah,
in a different way, in a different shape, in a different light. And I think that's like always valuable, right? And which isn't to say that things aren't without risk, right? Obviously, always get your drugs tested, always like
oh
research
yeah,
safe use
of
responsibly.
course.
But like that's, I mean,
Yeah,
life is always risk, but yeah, just like having things that allow us to see things from a different perspective and broaden our experience, and just getting out of, because life, I think, especially like modern life and the way it's structured, is very much, it becomes very easy to get into a rut, into a habit, into like doing the same thing and letting every day be the same as the one before. And so it's very important to sort of break out of that and not like let that narrow your focus and be like, this is all there is, because there's always more.
oh yeah. There's like so much more, and every day you have to be open, I think, to learn, right? Uh, I think every day can teach. This conversation with you have taught me so much, and it made me see things in new lights too. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no,
But
likewise. This has definitely been like a very, like, yeah, I've been having like, you've been pushing me to think about things and like come to realizations throughout this conversation that, yeah, it's that's like what it's all about, right? It's just like meeting new people, having new experiences, having new conversations.
yeah, and learning from each other. That's one of my favorite parts of this hobby. It's how I like even I never talked to you as I've started reading Errant and reading your work. We always get some glimpses and we start learning from each other. But having this opportunity to sit to you and hear from your mouth and hear your experiences and how you arrive at your work, it makes everything even clearer. Like I'm knowing you, and through you, I'm knowing your work as well. So thank you. But I mean, continuing a little bit, talking about weird. Do you do? How do you feel about spirituality or religion? Do you have some, or do you, how do you identify yourself in this sense?
Yeah, I think that I don't know where I stand with it. I think that I have been often figuring things out and searching for, not like searching deliberately, but it's definitely like an open question for me. I think I have like very strange, right? Like, because like obviously given my last name, like I'm from a culturally Muslim family and country. But like I grew up in Australia and I was basically raised by Italians and I went to a Catholic school and I've
Wow.
always been sort of interested in like Buddhism and just like religion and theology has always fascinated me. I think that understanding like life, understanding meaning, and looking at, I think that like one thing that I guess always interests me is that like religion religion like the secularization of sort of philosophy and intellectual thought is like a very recent development in human culture, and that like for much of history and even still like some of the greatest I guess like thought and philosophy that exists is religious in nature or from people who are thinking at least related to God, and what it means to like sort of have a soul and like be living in this material world. And so I think that like even whatever you want to call it, like spirituality, philosophy, however you choose to relate to it, it is something that like just for the sheer fact that it's like I'm a human being and this is a thing that human beings have grappled with since we were human beings, is something that I think about. And I think ideas of like I don't believe and this isn't in terms of like I guess in a fully religious sense. So like science is like obviously only to me necessarily incomplete, right? Science is a human tool and it's limited by human biases and perspective, and socio-cultural and economic factors. Like it's not an infallible thing. It's a lens through which to view the world, but it's not the only lens. And so I think that like keeping that in mind, keeping uh just like that there is this like other side to us that is like moral and ethical and spiritual. Yeah, that exists. I think that everybody reconciles it and deals with it in a different way, and I'm not entirely sure how I would deal with it. I guess like the same as my game design, I don't really find myself tied to anything specific. There are moments where I think about like Christianity and like the idea of Jesus, and of Jesus' teachings and of like the idea of love, the idea of the golden rule, the idea the sort of like there are a lot of like Christian phrases that I've been thinking about, that I've been turning over in my head a lot, and that I think have value and meaning just in terms of thinking about it. But then I'll also often, turn to teachings from Islam, from the Quran, or I'll think about like different schools of Buddhism, and so I don't find myself limited, I guess, or ascribing to any one thing in particular or believing one thing in particular, but more so I find myself being drawn to and being called upon to think about what is relevant to me in my life at a given moment. What I find that it's like, what am I lacking? What am I missing in this moment? Or what do I need to hear? Or yeah, just like what is going to serve me on my journey and to serve other people.
Nice, and it kind of relates how you approach your game design too. Like you're not prescribed to like this meaning. Like you took everything what's useful for you, what helps you, and kind of makes sense how you approach to that approach to game design too. Like you have this contact with so many cultures and so many philosophies, so many ways to do with spirituality, and you find its strength, what you find it useful, and took it from and you learn it from it, and you found your own path, and kind of what you did with Errant too, and that's very interesting to see how this relates to one another.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's been like the overriding theme, right? Is that when we started about and we're talking about weird, right? Like the idea of weird as meaning fate or destiny, queerness as being like
Yeah,
out of place. It's like
yeah,
you're fate or destiny is out of place. It's been about like authoring your own path. It's about finding your own meaning in things in a way that is unique to you rather than what is sort of already pre-packaged and created
Yeah.
and that you can fit into by making things fit you rather than fitting yourself into other things.
Yeah, that's a very wise way to approach of this confusion that we call life, I think. Uh, so, Ava, some of the last questions are more like fun and fictitious. I like to ask if you could have any superpower, what would you be, and what would be the first thing you would do with it?
Um, you know, I feel like really lately I have just been wanting to be a tiger, just like wanting to turn into a tiger and run through the jungle and like hunt like an animal, like kill a fucking zebra or something and eat it. It's very strange, a very weird and violent impulse, but the idea of having that kind of like raw animal power and being outside, I guess, of like I don't know, outside of like a structured life, just sort of being out in the wild and only having to think about survival and need has been very appealing to me lately. I don't know what that says about me, but yeah, I guess shapeshifting, animal shapeshifting. I would just want to go eat eat a cow. If I could turn into a tiger, I would
Yeah.
I would run out into the farmland and eat a cow.
And modern life is stressful. It's obviously being a tiger and just hunting but the kind of is because it's get back to our roots. Like we used to do that. We used to live in harmony. I think our existence now is very disharmonious in some way. So that
Yeah,
makes
I think
perfect
so.
sense. And yeah, and tigers are great. I love tigers. I love cats. Like I've seen your cats. We have four
Yeah,
cats here. I love cats and tigers. I mean, I particularly would prefer a panther because we have my favorite cat is like a black cat we have here, and he
yeah.
looks like a small, tiny panther. I love the, but that's great. Love it. Uh, and one other thing, like if you could pick anything weird, anything fantastical, anything supernatural or mythological, and you could make it real in our world, what would it be? What would it be?
Anything real, anything fantastical, anything.
It can be anything
Um,
like from games, like wizards or monsters,
true.
or it can
Yeah.
be
No, I think
folklore.
I would make like vampires or anything that kills humans real. I think that having something that is above us in the food chain would just like really help out our society. I think we're like too complacent and it's just like we've got no threats, we've got no real problems, and so we've just started like inventing shit. We just like fucking do discourse on Twitter. I think that if like vampires or some actual like threat to our existence was real, I think we'd like get our shit together a little bit more. I think it would help to have
That's
a
true.
common
Yeah,
enemy.
yeah. Nothing helps in a common. That's completely true. That's yeah. Awesome. Great answer. Yeah. Thank you. So Ava, uh, that's all my questions. But I always ask our guests, do you have anything you wanna share for listeners, or anything you're working on, or anything you're promote? I know just released the adventure in PDF from Gazelle, like the Tomb of the Crystal Tomb Robbers,
Yeah,
right?
so Tomb Robbers of the Crystal Frontier, we
Yeah.
did I edited it back before it was released, and I did a conversion for Errant, and the conversion of that was just released. So if you already own Tomb Robbers, you have now like an adventure that you can use with Errant. The PDF should be freely available. And the main thing, I don't know if it will be live when this episode comes out, but currently the pre-launch page is live for our Kickstarter for Sanctimonious Slimes versus Expired Epicures, which is another adventure for Errant, the first like official adventure from Kill Jester that we are publishing for the system. So that will
Oh,
be going live.
Nick, right?
Yeah.
Nick Hell's
Nick Nick
villain.
Nick Whalen of papersandpencils.com. Yeah, no, Nick is great. Nick is also part of Kill Jester and was one of my favorite bloggers when I was getting into the scene. And so it's really awesome to be able to like work on this adventure and publish it. That will be going live October 31st. and it'll run for 2 weeks. So yeah, that's the main thing that I would want to promote is check that out, give it a follow, give it a back if it's out.
Yeah, and this one we'll definitely have to put on the show notes. And I wanted to give a shout out to Nick Whelan. He created this fantastic podcast called Blogs on Tape that would take great blog posts of the OSR and turn it into podcasts that you could listen and taught me so much. So yeah.
Yeah, Blogs on Tape is a great resource in terms of just like archiving and preserving some of these very important, because like blogs are great, but they're also like ephemeral, and I've had the experience so many times of like reading a blog post and then thinking about it months later not being able to find it or remember what it was. And I think anything that like preserves that knowledge and keeps that transmission going is super valuable for preserving, I guess, like everything that's all the creative energy and thought that's coming out of the scene. I know that he's recording a new season of it right now, actually.
Wow. And it's very generous because it isn't only his blog post, it's blog post for the whole community. So it's really a work of love, and I think everybody benefited so much for it. So thank you so much, Nick, for doing this. Really appreciate it. And Ava, really so much for coming here, and we're definitely gonna put links for his adventure and errands, and thank you for sharing your insights and your thoughts and a little bit of yourself. I'm really glad. And that's it, people. Keep it weird and just have some fun. Play errands. Thank you for listening to Weird Games and Weirder People. If you'd like to keep up with the show, please subscribe to be notified when we release new episodes. If you'd like to support us, please leave a review or head on to code-fi.com/WGNWP. See you next time, and remember, weird is the new wonderful.